Hello everyone, Jason here again for the fourth episode on You Can Master Disease by Bernard Jensen. We'll be reading chapter 4 today. The title for chapter 4 is Intestinal Disorders. Here's the quote. There is but one cause of disease, poison, toxemia, most of which is created in the body by faulty living habits and faulty elimination. Continue the reading. In the chapter on reflex areas and remote symptoms, and in other parts of this book, the importance of the intestinal tract has been stressed. There should be no doubt about the relationship between health of the intestinal tract and health in the rest of the body. You know how true this is. There's so much coming out over the past decade about how our whole well-being is to our gut flora. One book that I've read recently by Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride, MD, is on gut psychology syndrome. This book, I would highly recommend it, even though I personally have not been diagnosed with gut syndrome. As I read this, as I look back on my life before I began this healing process, how many of these conditions were actually present within me? And I can actually see that in 90+% of Americans. We all have some degree of the negative impacts of having poor gut flora nowadays. Let's continue on with reading the book. There should be no doubt about the relationship between health of the intestinal tract and health in the rest of the body. And I'm not only talking about the physical body here, but also the mental and emotional bodies. Intestinal management probably is the most important thing a person can learn in a health-building routine. Some of the most important functions of life take place in the intestines. Through it, worn-out cells are eliminated, and new cell structures have their beginning. For the reason that the colon is supplied with fewer nerves than some other organs, distress signals are not so distinct as they are in most of the other organs of the body. Latent conditions may therefore develop in this area without our awareness of their presence. We would be very much concerned should any community in modern times revert to some of the unsanitary habits of those times past when the wastes of human and animal life were allowed to accumulate in the streets and elsewhere. Since drinking water was thus usually polluted, destructive epidemic diseases were prevalent and sometimes wiped out entire nations. We have succeeded in improving our external sanitation considerably, with the result that many of the loathsome diseases of the past have become very rare. So true. When it comes to human internal sanitation, however, we seem to be less concerned. I'm going to read that again. When it comes to human internal sanitation, however, we seem to be less concerned. Persons who are inclined to think it makes little difference how long intestinal waste is retained might give the matter more serious consideration if they realize the actual similarity between the city sewer and the disposal system of the body. Waste material that is not regularly evacuated from the intestines will accumulate, and the toxic products of decomposition may be taken up by the blood and lymph and be carried in every cell in the body. How true. When I began reading about intestinal health, not sure if it was Bernard Jensen or one of the other books I was reading. It might have been Dr. Gray, one of his books. And it talked about how cadavers, when people have passed away, they've opened those individuals up and looked at their intestinal tract, and they've found food that has been within their system for over 20 years. That means that food has been just sitting there, putrefying, giving off toxins, and who knows what negative ramifications that's having on the body. Continued with the book. At the Battle Creek Sanitarium, I heard Dr. John Harvey Kellogg say he knew of many cases in which operations were prevented by cleansing and revitalizing the bowel. He maintained that 90% of the diseases of civilization are due to improper functioning of the colon. Sir Arbuthnot Lane, MD of London, has shown the relation between bowel stasis and disease. He left no doubt as to how seriously he regarded the effects of intestinal intoxication when he said, quote, "The lower end of the intestine is the size that requires emptying every 6 hours. But by habit, we retain its contents 24 hours. The result is ulcers and cancer." Besides these world-renowned exponents of intestinal sanitation, other authorities have given recognition to the belief that cleanliness of the colon is necessary to good health. It is believed that disorders such as appendicitis, infected tonsils, liver and gallbladder infections, dysfunction of the heart and blood vessels, sinusitis, arthritis and rheumatism, etc., no doubt have their origin in a sluggish colon. There is also an increasing number of morbid conditions in the various parts of the colon involving the flexures, the rectum, and the anus. Consider the amount of surgery and various therapies for hemorrhoids, fistulas, prostate disturbances, and malignancies. That's how true that is. And, when I read that quote by one doctor here about the result of not emptying our intestines every 6 hours, the result is ulcers and cancer. You think about the millions upon millions and billions probably that have been spent on just cancer research. And it may just, it may just come down to, you don't need to do all this research, it's already been done. We just need to learn how to take care of our colon and our intestines. Sometimes the simplest things are the most difficult to grasp. Let's continue. There is also an increasing number of morbid conditions in the various parts of the colon, involving the flexures, the rectum, and the anus. Consider the amount of surgery and various therapies for hemorrhoids, fistulas, prostate disturbances, and malignancies. Principal causes: a poor start in life. Due to the numerous popular drugs, artificial food products, etc., in use these days, it is difficult for a child to get the proper start in life. The first few days of an infant's life are extremely important. Important because it is at this time that the foundation is laid for vitality and health, or for low resistance and sickness. How a baby is handled during the first few months may determine whether he will have strong bones, sound teeth, good muscular structure, etc. In the first place, parents should live natural, healthy lives so they can pass on healthy bodies to their children. In the second place, babies should be breastfed and long enough to give them a good start. Among the reasons for breastfeeding is that the infant needs that substance which is present in the mother's milk for 3 days after childbirth, called colostrum. This feeds the acidophilus bacteria in the infant's colon, and this normal flora establishes peristalsis and natural activity throughout the intestinal tract. To feed a baby an artificial formula is to give it an artificial start. Even at birth, the infant is still a part of the mother. There is a direct relationship between the chemistry of the mother and the chemistry of her child. Mother's milk cannot be duplicated in a compound formulated in a laboratory. It is a crime because beyond all description, to cheat the child out of its most important natural right, for mother's milk is a baby's birthright. It gives the baby a normal start during the first few days of life. And how true this is, I know this from experience. My mom even shared with me a while back where she breastfed my brother, my older brother. She didn't breastfeed me. And, there's reasons behind that she gave. And because of that, I didn't get that bacteria I needed. And one of the issues I can remember throughout all childhood is I had constipation issues. Not like, my father and my brother did too, but not like I had it worse than they had. And it's just amazing on just these little things that we're just not aware of that can have a huge impact on a child. We may sometimes wonder why comparatively few mothers today nurse their babies. When there is refusal on the part of the mother animal to nurse her young, we investigate to determine whether there had been a dietary deficiency of manganese. Since restoration of this mineral to the diet stimulates the mother to nurse her young, it has been named the mother love element. Whether the human mother refuses to nurse her child because of custom, vanity, or dietary deficiencies is not easy to say. I am inclined to believe that the advice given mothers in most modern hospitals and sanitary kitchens probably is responsible in a large degree. Another factor is excessive tobacco smoking. I know chiropractic obstetricians refuse to handle cases if the mother smokes. Not only is the fetus affected before birth, but after birth, the milk will be polluted in about 30 seconds after a cigarette is smoked. The pattern we start out with, we inherit from our parents. It is important to learn how to live correctly, not only to benefit ourselves from the next generation, to benefit not only those for whom we are directly responsible, but those whom we influence in our daily contacts. The mineral elements which the fetus draws from the mother's body must be replaced through proper eating. If the mother is chemically deficient, her child will be born half-starved, chemically hungry. For children who have been improperly fed and do not have a normal intestinal flora, attempts should be made to establish this and to maintain it throughout life. This should be our first duty to such children. For without normal bacterial activity and normal bowel movements, there will be gas formation, diarrhea, dryness of the bowel, and many children's complaints. The flora can be changed by proper administration of acidophilus culture, which will be discussed in this chapter. And I go back to the book that I discussed earlier, the gut and psychology syndrome. All of the ramifications. For instance, I suffered from ADHD, and that can be tied right into having issues with the whole gut flora. Another issue is that they talk about in here is children having epilepsy, etc. And it's just all of the children ailments that we're having nowadays. I wonder how many of those can be cured by reestablishing a good gut flora again. Whey protein products from goats or cow's milk, either fresh or powdered, are desirable in the diet because they feed the acidophilus bacteria and sweeten the bowel. If the child cannot take acidophilus culture by mouth, it can be placed in the rectum with a baby enema syringe. For the very young child, a little sugar of milk added to raw milk in its diet may help defeat acidophilus bacteria that have been implanted in the bowel. incorrect diet. Although this subject has been discussed in other parts of this book, we must emphasize again the importance of the optimum nutrition to general health and to normal intestinal function. We have explained the evil effects of denatured foods, so their relation to intestinal disorders should be obvious. We will here add warnings against overeating, hurried eating, eating when not hungry, and eating when emotionally disturbed. Faulty habits. Needless to say, it is unwise to allow false modesty or any of the conventions imposed by civilization to interfere with bowel evacuation when the signal is received. This signal of nature should be heeded promptly in order to avoid the development of unnatural bowel habits, which will result in destructive consequences. Many persons deprive the body of natural activity, which is essential to normal functioning. If we transfer so many of our physical activities to mechanical devices that our internal as well as external muscles become weakened and flabby, we should not be surprised when our digestive and eliminative functions begin to deteriorate. The tea and coffee habit, as well as tobacco smoking and the drinking of alcohol, has its toxic effect upon the intestinal tract. Added to these are the poisons of numerous medications. Consider the thousands of remedies for constipation alone. Mental influences also are very important. When we analyze intestinal disorders or any other disturbances in the body, we should consider the effects of excitement, nervous tension, anxiety, fear, and worry. These can throw the nervous mechanism of defaction out of balance. How so true, and all that's coming about the vagus nerve and what impact that has on not only our body but our overall health and mental well-being. Constipation. More than 45,000 laxatives and cathartics are used in this country today. It has been calculated that Americans spend $100 million a year in their effort to overcome constipation. And that's probably from the 1940s or 1950s. Just think what it is nowadays. These laxative and cathartic products contain harsh and poisonous substances, so that the colon will react and eliminate as quickly as possible, and the fecal material along with them. The foods we eat normally do not remain very long in either the stomach or the small intestine, and the length of time required for passage through the large intestine is important. The slower the movement of the waste material through the colon, the greater the bacterial content, and the greater the possibility of putrefaction. A certain amount of time is required for the bacterial breakdown of some of the cellulose and coarse fibers, but in many persons the passage is too slow. Accumulated matter in any disposal system decays and emits foul odors when allowed to become stagnant. It is said that normal human feces consists chiefly of dead bacteria, millions being excreted daily. Quite frequently, we see magazine and newspaper articles by writers who contend that indefinite retention of intestinal contents is not harmful to the body. This lulls some constipated individuals into the false belief that although they are accumulating waste day after day, it really does not matter. They might be surprised at what their iris would show to the contrary. It has an asterisk here, and the asterisk says, all bodily conditions are reflected in the iris of the eye. Yeah, that's a study of iridology. In fact, Bernard Jensen was known for that in iridology and how you can look at the eye and quickly evaluate what the conditions are in the individual's body that need to be taken care of. Continuing. Other individuals are deceived into believing that they are not constipated because they do have frequent movements. But altogether, they may be eliminating only a small portion of the bowel contents instead of about 4/5 of it as they should. I mean, so just how true this is. I can remember in the past just having when I was constipating, having lots of gas, and just the smell alone. And as I worked on clearing out my intestines, building up good bacteria, it is amazing how the movements, the food moves quickly now through my intestines, and I don't have as many of the gas and or the odor issues like I used to. Continuing. While attending the National College in Chicago many years ago, autopsies were performed on 300 persons. According to the history of these persons, 285 had claimed they were not constipated and had normal movements, and only 15 had admitted that they were constipated. The autopsies showed the opposite to be the case, however, and only 15 were found not to have been constipated, while 285 were found to have been constipated. Some of the histories of these 285 persons stated that they had had as many as 5 or 6 bowel movements daily. Yet autopsies revealed that in some of them the bowels were 12 inches in diameter. Wow, 12 inches in diameter, that's not normal. The bowel walls were encrusted with material, in one case peanuts, which had been lodged there for a very long time. Thus we see that the average patient coming to a doctor's office does not know whether or not he is constipated. Some of my patients believe that if they have 3 bowel movements a day, they have diarrhea, and that a couple of movements a week is normal. An example of the latter was a lady patient I had who assured me that she had normal movements, that her bowels moved regularly, every Tuesday and Friday morning. Most people have not been properly educated in their childhood to realize the importance of adequate daily elimination and to heed nature's call to evacuate the rectum. This indifference to the natural urge to evacuate the bowels may be the beginning of constipation. Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, who gave us so much of his philosophy and practical experience, lived to the age of 91. Since he did more work in connection with intestinal sanitation than anyone in this country, his advice should be worth listening to. It was his opinion that we should eliminate the residue of each meal 15 to 18 hours after eating it. Babies, savages, birds, and animals evacuate a short time after each meal. Some of the patients who came to us for colonic treatments were far from this ideal. Some of them passed the seeds of grapes they had eaten 9 months before the colonics were given them. Others passed such things as popcorn and barium meal they had been retaining in the colon for years. Those segments of the bowel where there are such incrustations are the sources of disturbances behind reflex symptoms in remote parts of the body. Observe from the following statistics published by Register General of England that no group has contributed more to the death rate from intestinal diseases than doctors. And here it gives a comparative mortality from diseases of the digestive system. And the number one group there is physicians and surgeons at 50, innkeepers at 45, seamen at 43, and wouldn't you know it, farmers are way down at 25, farmers are at 25, gardeners are at 22, and agricultural laborers are the lowest at 19. As shown by the above statistics, the death rate of doctors is 31 points higher than that of agricultural laborers and 22 points higher than that of the average death rate of all workers who die of diseases of the digestive system. The necessity for the removal of waste was proved by the embryo chicken heart experiment of Dr. Alexis Carroll in 1912 at the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research. This isolated tissue was kept alive and growing for some 30 years. It was fed by the nutrient solution in which it was kept, but it was necessary that waste end products not be allowed to accumulate. When not fed, the The tissue did not grow. But one time after the doctor had retired, an assistant forgot to remove the waste. The tissue died. I am convinced that the person who suffers from bowel constipation also has a type of tissue constipation and encumbrance in other parts of the body, such as the eyes, gallbladder, liver, kidneys, lungs, etc. Constipation increases the work of other organs of excretion and may result in their depletion. As cellular processes are interfered with, they become inactive. With such constipation throughout, what body could remain well? I do not wish to give the impression that I have become one-sided in my emphasis upon the importance of a healthy, clean intestinal tract. But evidence has been coming to me for a long time, which indicates that people do not realize that constipation is at the root of most of our diseases today. I feel that people are not regarding poor health as seriously as they should. They place their health problems secondary to all their other problems, financial, domestic, real, and embedded, while the health of an individual or a nation should at all times have first place on the list of duties and responsibilities. Without health, there is little that one can truly enjoy. Recently, I received a letter from a patient I once examined in the Middle West, whose case is apropos and so typical that I mention it here. After telling me incidentally about the hemorrhoids which are bothering her and which are secondary to a number of disorders, she seriously requests that I advise her what type of floor covering in their new dwelling would be easiest for her to walk on and therefore be easiest on the hemorrhoidal condition. Like those persons referred to who do not realize the basic importance of a healthy intestinal tract, she is requesting advice about end results rather than about the causes underlying her symptoms. If she got rid of all her basic troubles, she would be able to walk comfortably on the floor, whether it was covered with linoleum or carpet. I cannot help believing that had this woman's intestinal tract been cleansed and rejuvenated in the first place, most of her difficulties would have been avoided. Other doctors also may have noticed that it is typical of patients to minimize the importance of adequate bowel elimination and try to call attention to other factors, such as the type of shoes they find the most comfortable, or the kind of floor they must stand upon, as in the above-mentioned case. Constipation can be corrected by eliminative diet, by normalizing the intestinal flora, by slanting board exercises, and by health education. Other disorders which may occur when the body have become devitalized and laden with toxins are colitis, prolapsus, worms, piles, and hemorrhoids. Remedial measures. It is difficult to make rules on how to handle the various intestinal disorders. But first of all, we must consider that the colon is only one part of the body and depends upon the proper activity of every other organ for normal function. The mind, for instance, can sometimes cause more intestinal disturbances than the worst diet. That's so important. Let's read that again. The mind, for instance, can sometimes cause more intestinal disturbances than the worst diet. There are times when a sedentary occupation can be a direct cause of a bowel disturbance. Anyone who is enervated, tired, or depleted does not have full power to eliminate, and such a person may develop habits of delayed movement. This is the distended bowel, the irritated and spastic bowel. There is the bowel that produces pressure symptoms, and there is the sluggish and pocketed bowel. There is the bowel that is suffering from the effects of drugs, hard waters, and devitalized foods. There is the bowel that is subjected to putrefaction and fermentation. With all of these conditions, it might be well to consider an eliminative program to begin with. See the chapters on the theory of the healing crisis and fasting and eliminative diets. We'll be getting those in the next episodes. Just as faulty habits have contributed to the development of constipation, so can desirable habits help to overcome it. As we have stated, it is very important to allow the bowels to move whenever they give the impulse. Rest after meals is desirable. How true. Hydrotherapy, when intelligently applied, is powerful in its therapeutic effects. Just the drinking of pure water is beneficial in the correction of intestinal disorders, especially if one drinks 1 or 2 glasses immediately upon arising. Sitz baths are very helpful in overcoming constipation. Every other day, one should sit for 2 to 5 minutes with the hips in cold water around 60 degrees Fahrenheit, followed by sitting in warm water around 100 degrees Fahrenheit for 5 to 10 minutes, and ending with cold water for 2 minutes. Persons who are troubled with intestinal gas may be greatly relieved by a wet pack applied to the abdomen. Wring a hand towel from cold water and fold it the size to cover the abdomen. After this wet towel has been placed on the abdomen, cover it completely with a heavy Turkish towel that will extend at least an inch beyond the wet towel. Wind the Turkish towel all the way around the body in corset fashion so as to hold the wet towel securely in place and to prevent the entrance of any air. This pack should be left on overnight and repeated until relief is obtained. Along with the use of these wet packs, very stubborn cases of intestinal gas have been quickly relieved by taking no food for 2 or 3 days and drinking only buttermilk when hungry and water when thirsty. In cases of colitis, also, cold water packs on the abdomen are beneficial. A relaxed mind, free from fear, hatred, and resentment, will help any case of colitis. Although in most instances a person should have in his diet plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables and some whole grains. It may be necessary for patients with colitis to eliminate raw foods from the diet, at least temporarily, and also fibrous and bulky foods such as stems, peelings, and seeds. The best food in the world may cause disturbance in the intestinal tract of a nervous person. In correcting spastic conditions, we use a bland diet to begin with, proper exercise, mental hygiene, and eventually a full health-building program. All cases of intestinal disturbance, a diet which is balanced, varied, and in proper combination is necessary. Some persons are food drunkards. They crave the effects of certain foods to which they have become accustomed, and they sometimes go on binges of chocolate, starchy foods, etc. There must be some knowledge and regulation about the food that goes into the stomach. Abnormal cravings that have developed through excessive acid accumulations in the body should not be indulged. In persons with intestinal disorders, the intestinal flora needs normalizing, and we are going to discuss this presently. In addition to fresh vegetables and fruits, these individuals are particularly in need of such foods as yogurt and other sour milk products. Yogurt is a cultured milk product which originated in Europe. When I was in Switzerland, I noticed that yogurt was considered the most important item in the dairy store. They use a combination there of yogurt with apple juice or a small quantity of apple concentrate, which is wonderful for the intestine. Persons who consider milk to be constipating usually will have no difficulty when using milk in the raw state and in combination with fruits and vegetables. Foods that are high in B vitamins such as yeast assist normal intestinal functioning. You know how true this is in the reading. Also, most people don't understand this, but at least in the United States, the yogurt that we eat nowadays has very few bacteria, very few strains. And those type of bacteria that are in our yogurt actually are the type that pass quickly through your system. And the problem with that, they're beneficial for us and they give us, the benefits, but they don't reestablish the good flora in our intestines. So to do that, we need to take a really high quality kefir. For instance, I have a local Amish farmer that produces a raw milk kefir for me. Kefir has up to, if it's homemade, which this is, it'll have 30 plus strains of not only the good bacteria, but the good yeast. And we all need the good yeast. Most people don't understand, for instance, when we take antibiotics and other drugs nowadays, those kill off the bacteria in our intestines, but they don't kill off the yeast. So what happens, that's why so many people have situation with candida, is because we're killing off the good bacteria, and then that leaves us wide open for all the candida or the bad yeast then to take over our intestinal tract and just wreak havoc. I mean, one of the problems with having candida is that when our intestines are overwhelmed with candida, the bad yeast creates lesions in our gut wall. And then what happens to those lesions is what was called leaky gut, where undigested food, toxins, bacteria, etc., they leak out of our gut and get into our bloodstream, into all parts of our body, and just start creating all this havoc. Histamine reactions, allergies, and other diseases within our body. So it's really important to have a really good source of, the best source that I see is a really good raw kefir, and also you need more of the aggressive. I don't mean that in a bad way, but more, the strong, aggressive type of bacteria that you would get from a soil-based probiotics. They're usually on the bottle it says SBO for soil-based organisms, and those are the ones that really help to also populate your intestinal tract. Most you see in the old days, 100 plus years ago, we would drink out of streams because it was safe. We would drink, out of streams. I remember when I was young, I'd just pull a carrot right out of the ground and I would eat it there. And that was a great thing to do because that good bacteria that's in the soil, by me eating that carrot without washing it, I was getting the good bacteria into my system. But no longer, we're so sanitary in the so-called the culture nowadays that we are not getting that, those bacteria that we used to get that would populate our intestinal tract and then create basically that lining throughout our entire system that basically make us supermen and superwomen and protect us from viruses and bacteria that are, the bad ones. Fermented milks have been used as beverages and as food for many centuries. The souring of milk is a spontaneous change due to the action of the Bacillus acidae lactati, which means acid-loving, acid-producing, acid-resisting. When these bacilli have converted the milk sugar into lactic acid, the milk becomes sour. After milk has soured, the growth of disease-producing bacteria ceases. Since unfriendly disease-producing bacteria do not thrive in an acid medium, a change of intestinal flora to contain a preponderance of acidophilus bacilli is desirable. As previously stated, in most patients, the ratio of unfriendly bacteria is 80 to 85% to only 15 to 20% of acidophilus bacilli. This ratio should be reversed in order to destroy the cause of constipation, auto-intoxication, and other intestinal disorders. There are several good acidophilus cultures which can be obtained, such as those put only out by the Battle Creek Sanitarium at Battle Creek, Michigan, and the Kovac Laboratories in Los Angeles. We have found that the acidophilus bacteria can be increased in the colon by the use of daily retention enemas of whey. Whey by mouth also is helpful. When is the intestinal flora changed? According to Dr. Kellogg, it is changed, in quote, when the stools are soft, frequent, 3 times a day, and free from putrid or rancid odor. Examination by a bacteriologist should show 80% of the acid formers and 20% of other bacteria. Old troubles may still continue, perhaps somewhat modified, but when the change reaches 75-25, marked improvement will be evident, and the more complete the change of flora, the more decided will be the change for the better in the patient's symptoms. The presence of worms in the intestinal tract is more frequent than we might suspect. They are sometimes taken to the body with foods not thoroughly washed, especially foods that have been grown on soil fertilized with manure or sludge, not properly composted. At times it is difficult to get worms out of the body without giving vermifuge. In cases of tapeworm, extreme measures may be necessary. A method I have used successfully is the garlic treatment, which is given as follows. The patient must eat nothing but garlic or onions for 2 days. Wow. Then a powerful herbal laxative is given, and when it is time for the bowel to evacuate, the patient sits in a vessel of warm milk. Since cold air usually keeps the worm from leaving the body, the warm milk is a favorable means of getting it to pass out of the lower bowel. Wow, that's a lot to go through. I know for me, what I use, which is much simpler, is I use ivermectin. Then again, I'm not a doctor, not giving out, I'm just letting you know that from my experience, I take ivermectin. I take 12 milligrams of ivermectin for 3 days in a row, and sometimes I'll even do it for 5 days in a row, and just boom, it completely cleans out all parasites. That's been my experience. Continuing. In acute cases of piles or hemorrhoids, the warm sitz bath will usually give temporary relief and permanent correction if persistently used along with other therapeutic measures. A cupful of flaxseed tea placed in the rectum with a large bulb syringe each night upon retiring will also give relief. When the rectum and anus are tightly contracted, we use Dr. Young's rectal dilators, which are cylinders in graduated sizes designed to gradually stretch and relax the muscles in this area. These are also quite helpful in cases of hemorrhoids, as is finger massage also, since hemorrhoids result from improper functioning or disease of the liver. We work toward cleansing of the whole system in order to correct the condition. We use the slanting board in these cases. When at stool, it is well to hold the hands above the head, as this keeps the rectal tissues from protruding during defecation. Papaya tablets taken with meals are very effective in all digestive disturbances. To soften the bowel's contents, we use flaxseed meal. A tablespoonful mixed in a glass of water should be taken 3 times a day. A tablespoon of blackstrap molasses 3 times a day is also a wonderful laxative for most people. When the bowel tissues are irritated or inflamed, a cupful of flaxseed tea 10 minutes before each meal will have a soothing effect. Flaxseed tea is made as follows. Simmer for 10 minutes, 1 tablespoon of whole flaxseed in 1 pint of water. Strain and drink the liquid only. Flaxseed tea can also be used for enemas of the lower bowel where there is an irritation. While we do not approve of the regular use of laxatives for persons who must have a laxative of some kind, we use a food laxative that helps us to evacuate the bowel contents because of the bulk which it provides. In time, this natural food laxative should help to rebuild the bowel wall, as it is nourishing. It is made as follows. Grind together 1/3 pound each of raisins, dates, and prunes. Then add 8 tablespoons of whey, 6 tablespoons of flaxseed meal, 8 tablespoons of blackstrap molasses, and mix well together. If more liquid is needed to mix the ingredients well, use a little flaxseed tea. An amount the size of a golf ball should be taken before each meal. When taken with acidophilus culture, bowel activity will eventually improve. While I do not believe that any of these measures alone will cure, they are helpful as relief measures that can be used along with our Right Living program. When we have succeeded in correcting intestinal disorders, we are on the surest roads to health. Alexis Carrel has said, "The cell is immortal. It is merely the fluid in which it floats which degenerates. Renew this fluid at intervals. Give the cell something upon which to feed. And so far as we know, the pulsation of life may go on forever." Thus ends Chapter 4 on intestinal disorders.